Hello, and welcome to the final presentation of our 2025 Adoptaship Program. My name is Mitchell, and I work with the Canadian Geographic Education Team in Ottawa, Ontario. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to take a moment and to thank the Canadian Coast Guard for their ongoing support of the Adoptaship Program. This year, we connected with hundreds of youth from across Canada, as well as their teachers and family through live presentations, classroom activities, and an open call for questions about the Coast Guard operations. We're thrilled that so many young people now know about the unique experiences and amazing opportunities offered by the Coast Guard, and we look forward to sharing Coast Guard stories with you again in the future. For today's presentation, we had planned on meeting with the Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, Mario Pelletier, but as his role sometimes demands, he has been pulled into some important Coast Guard matters and unfortunately cannot join us today. However, we have another special guest joining us with whom we've never before featured as a part of the Adoptaship Program, Deputy Commissioner Mr. Andy Smith. Deputy Commissioner Smith's role is an important one. He ensures that the Coast Guard delivers all of its programs and achieves all of its goals by choosing and supporting important objectives and priorities for the organization, by deciding ways in which the Coast Guard's various resources get allocated and that those resources are well managed in supporting and leading the Coast Guard workforce. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Deputy Commissioner Smith. It's great to have you with us today.
Hello, Mitchell, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's great to be back for another year of adoptaship, and I say with all sincerity, speaking to you and children across the country today is unquestionably going to be the highlight of my day.
Well, we're very excited to have you with us and to hear all about your story within the Coast Guard. But before we get to some of your remarks, we have a great list of questions for you that we've gathered from this year's participants. But we're going to kick things off with a short video that Commissioner Pelletier selected as a part of the role on engineers in the marine industry. So let me bring that up for you guys now.
Have you always been fascinated with how things work? Have you always liked to take things apart just to find out if you could put them back together? If you follow your passion and study hard in school, we can help you develop those skills that might lead you here.
Well, this video is definitely a great reminder that there's a lot of diversity in the roles and individual stories that can be connected to the Canadian Coast Guard. I'm going to pass the microphone to you now so you can share a bit about your own story with the young people in our audience today, and how did you first begin with the Coast Guard and what your role is now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mitchell. Much like Commissioner Pelchi, I too am a marine engineer. I spent 34 years in the Royal Canadian Navy as a marine engineer and came to the Coast Guard 8 years ago, primarily to run the fleet renewal program. It's really once in a lifetime opportunity to renew the entire Coast Guard fleet. To put it another way, I run the shipbuilding file for the Coast Guard. Truly an exciting and rewarding job. I've got a really bright group of engineers and project managers, work with shipyards across the country, much like you saw in the video where you have young people that come in that might have learned how to take a tricycle or a lawnmower apart at some point in time, and then they translate that into their adult lives, into the engineering side of the house. Um, it's a it's a great job.
Amazing. Well, I mean, you surely know what you're doing after so much experience, and it's great to hear that you have a great team working around you to kind of lead the Coast Guard into the future. Well, we have been collecting questions from our audience over the last 6 weeks, and we'll begin with some of those, but we also welcome live questions from the audience. So if you're joining us on camera, be sure to have your questions ready and have your cameras on so that we know that you're ready to ask some questions. And if you're joining us off camera, you can put your questions into the chat at any time. So our first question that we have for you today is, what advice would you give a young person who dreams of joining the Coast Guard one day?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great leading question, Mitchell. I would say two things to children across the country. If you've got an interest, and there's some great online videos that uh, uh, give folks an idea of what it is that the Coast Guard does, I would just say stay current, stay informed, learn about what the Coast Guard does through online videos, so that when you get to the point when you're in your final few years of high school, that you make an informed decision. That would be my first point. And the second one is, for goodness sakes, stay in school, kids. Um, Maybe I'm showing a little bit of my bias here, but when you get into high school, take the math and science elective courses in high school. It keeps all your options and doors open as you look to make career choices.
Yeah, it's definitely good to think about what you want to do in the future as early as you can, so you can get where you want to be in the future for sure. So, and how many ships does the Canadian Coast Guard fleet have? Do you have a favorite vessel that you've been on or just admire?
We have about 120 ships, maybe 122 all in. Those are both large and small. Some are the big icebreakers, down to some of the smaller search and rescue lifeboats that are positioned all across the coastline of this country. If I had a favorite, and I'll show a bias here a little bit, I have a cottage in Nova Scotia, and kids, you can look up where that is later on a map. It's called Port Bickerton in eastern Nova Scotia. I'll give you a little bit of a hint where it is. But the search and rescue lifeboat there that was built only about 3 years ago, it's called Chignecto Bay. I've been out on that ship a number of times, and so that's my favorite. It's close to my cottage, so that's not it's not a big ship, but it's one that's near and dear to me.
There you go. Sounds like a great reason to have a favorite ship. And can you describe what a typical day as the Deputy Commissioner of the Coast Guard looks like?
Certainly, and it's very much like the job of the commissioner. We start every day, and it's really cool. We start every day at 8:30 with a daily national operations brief, where we take a look at the fleet status across the country, where all of our ships are positioned at this time of year, where all the icebreakers are, and that brief also includes an ongoing assessment of any marine incidents that have gone on across the country. Unfortunately, fishing, for example, is one of the most perilous occupations in this country, and accidents do happen, and the Coast Guard's there to respond to those type of accidents. And so we have an ongoing assessment of incidents, or lost kayakers, or collisions at sea, or oil spills. And so we have an understanding on how we are responding and where we're going. We also have a very close look at every day as what the weather is across the country, and what might that mean for mariners at sea. We have an idea of where our icebreakers are and where they're going. It's a great way to start the day because it makes it current every day. And then the rest of the day could be any of the typical functions that you might envision a head of a company might do, whether that be planning for staffing, or future operations, or in some budget committees. We get to visit bases and stations to actually see where the great people of the Coast Guard actually do their work. It's a dynamic job, it's a diverse job, but I would say again, it's a great job.
Yeah, I imagine that question is hard to answer because it doesn't sound like every day is the same. So trying to describe a single day can be pretty hard. So, but yeah, what is the most rewarding part of your job? You talked about it a bit earlier, about why you maybe joined in the first place. But is there a specific thing that really motivates you to go every day?
It's really an easy answer, and notwithstanding that I'm an engineer and I spend a lot of my time pouring through, engineering type work and project management work, the best part of the day, or the most rewarding part, is related to the people. The Coast Guard has about 5,000 people all in, and just seeing young people come into the Coast Guard that are full of interest and vigor and enthusiasm, and seeing them learn and succeed every day and being successful, that's what really excites me, and why I'm one of the reasons I'm still here. Just to see these new people come in and want to make a difference, and get them to have experience and learn and grow. that's the most rewarding part of the job.
Yeah, sounds great to work for something where everyone's definitely working for something bigger than themselves for sure. But and our next question here, does the Coast Guard have helicopters for search and rescue, and how are they used?
Yeah, another great question. We do have helicopters. We've got about 22 helicopters that are positioned across the country, and they actually land on ships. So a lot of our ships have flight decks on them, so where the helicopters will be on the ships and can be deployed off the ships for search and rescue or reconnaissance missions, and they will often carry rescue specialists that can deploy and help mariners or that are in distress.
Awesome. Sounds like an exciting but very important job for sure. Does the Canadian Coast Guard work with other countries, different Coast Guards, and how do you guys help each other?
Yeah, another great question. We work with Coast Guards all around the world, and we actually go to meetings once a year with them. There's a Pacific Coast Guard forum that takes account into countries off the Pacific. There's a North Atlantic Coast Guard forum where we are linked up with like-minded Coast Guards, and also in the Arctic countries as well, where we look at similar problems and challenges and processes and how they do their business and what we might bring to the table that might be different, or how they can learn from us and how we can learn from them. And it's a very vibrant and dynamic relationship with other countries.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like everyone's kind of working together within the Coast Guard itself to work together to solve problems. So it's a great thing when you're also able to work with others as well. Our next one, have you seen marine animals like polar bears and whales while working on a ship?
I have, and I must say, never get tired of that. I've seen polar bears and whales. I've seen seals and puffins, and I've also a number of time seen dolphins. And when you see dolphins at sea, it's pretty cool.
Well, speaking of dolphins, it looks like you found one right behind you. What,
Oh, Echo, sorry,
what
go
kinds
ahead,
of
Mitchell.
things has Echo been up to lately? I haven't seen him for a year.
Echo is always busy, always around, always giving people high fives, and he's everybody's friend. Echo is.
Well, it sounds like a stressful job for sure. I hope he knows how important he is in the Coast Guard.
Yeah, um, like you said, he's everybody's friend.
There you go. Well, I don't know. I mean, Echo might know this one as well, but how do Coast Guard ships get their names?
Well, how do they get their names? Why don't I just see if Echo's got a favorite? Let me see if he'll whisper into my ear, see if he's got a favorite ship. Echo, have you got a favorite ship? Oh, oh, Echo, I should have known that. Captain Molly Cool. We have an icebreaker named Captain Molly Cool, and that's Echo's favorite ship. And children, you can look up that as well. Captain Molly Cool is a great story to a great Canadian. If you can read up about her as well. I'm sorry, you go ahead there, Mitchell. How do ships get their names? I think was your question.
Oh,
Um,
I loved hearing about Echo's favorite ship. It's a great choice as well.
How do Coast Guard ships get their names? Another great question. Oftentimes we name them after important people, like Captain Molly Cool, sometimes like after politicians, like our largest ship, the Louis S. Saint Laurent. But also sometimes, and it's a great link into the Canadian Geographic Society, um, we often name them after geographic parts of the country. Thanks so much there, Echo. Um, Geographic parts of the country, all the search and rescue lifeboats are named after bays. Chignecto Bay, Chedabucto Bay off the east coast, or Pachina Bay or McIntyre Bay off the west coast. And that really is done to make sure that as the Canadian Coast Guard ships are positioned across the country, Canadians can actually identify with the ships and see their area or their history represented in the ships.
Amazing. Well, I mean, it was great to hear Echo's favorites, and it's certainly a great link to learning about more Canadian history just by learning about the names of Canadian Coast Guard vessels. Uh, so our next one, as an engineer, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with this, but are there ever problems with the vessels, like mechanical problems or sinking, and how does the Coast Guard handle situations like that?
Fortunately, we have great people at sea, so we're never faced with our ship sinking. But I would say to the children across the country, much like your parents' cars, cars over time, they need new tires or mufflers or, um, things go wrong with your car. It's the same thing with ships. And so we periodically have to do repair and maintenance on our ships, sometimes by ourselves and sometimes with some shipyards across the country. And it's an ongoing challenge. The average age of our ships is 40 years of age. And for those of you whose parents have an old car, you can appreciate that as cars get older, they need more maintenance. And we're on top of that to make sure the ships remain safe to allow our crews to go to sea.
Yeah, I mean, aging a good ship, only makes it more vintage and better, right? Uh, w-
Absolutely.
and so we asked about your favorite ship. We asked Echo's favorite ship, but what is the largest ship in the Canadian Coast Guard fleet?
And I'll give you a longer answer here, Mitchell. The largest ship is the Louis S. Saint Laurent. It is the flagship of the Canadian Coast Guard. It's our largest icebreaker, and it spends a lot of its time in the up in the Arctic. It's a venerable ship. It's about 55 years of age at the moment. And for children who may have been paying attention last weekend, there were two announcements where the government's going to build two new polar icebreakers that are actually going to be bigger than the Louis S. Saint Laurent. And as a link back to your question around names of ships, the two names of these vessels are going to be the Arpatuk and the Imnariuak. Both of those, we work very closely with Indigenous peoples in the north to develop those names. One of them refers to an island in Ngava Bay, and there's a little bit of a trivia question here that teachers and children can go and look up later. But Arpachuak is an island in Ngava Bay, so a little bit of a hint there. And the Imnariuak is a cape on Banks Island, and I'll give you a hint there, just over your left shoulder there on the map of the Arctic there, Mitchell. Kids, you can see Banks Island. I won't tell you which one it is, but it's on the map. Yeah, right close to where Mitchell's head was there. And These two ships will be delivered in about 5 years, and they'll be able to go right up to the North Pole.
Wow, those sound like they'd be fun to go on. You just go in the summer; it's nice and warm up there, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So with these new ships and with the aging of the vessels that you have in your fleet, what are some of the reasons that ships get decommissioned?
I'll link back to the question I answered around maintenance, and much like your parents' cars, kids, at some point in time, um, cars have a natural life of, anybody who has a car over 12 years old, your parents are probably starting to look at a new car. Much like ships, I said the average age of our ships is 40 years old. We have some that are well over 50. And at some point in time, notwithstanding that the ships are safe and reliable, it just costs a lot of money to keep them going. So at some point in time, it is actually better to build new ships than keep the old ones maintained. And that's the challenge that we have now is we're keeping our older fleet running. And the exciting part is that we have a program to renew the fleet, and that's what I do along with the great team that I have. Is we look to build new ships as the old ones get taken out of service and get decommissioned.
Well, I'm sure it's great to hear about the 2 new massive icebreakers that are going to be built in the next 5 years. For sure, it's a great focal point to look at for the future. And our final question that we have from this list is, what are the most critical jobs that will need to be filled over the next 10 years? And how can students in our audience who are still in elementary school and secondary school begin preparing for them?
Super question. And it links actually back to your first question about what advice I would give to young people who are thinking about the Coast Guard, Mitchell. As the Coast Guard embarks on a once in a lifetime plan of renewing the fleet, and the fleet is actually growing. So our fleet is getting bigger. We're going to need more people in the Coast Guard. We're going to need more engineers. We're going to need more navigational officers to run the ships, and more ships captains. So I would say those are opportunities that are going to continue to present themselves. There is, I will say, for children out there, we have a great Coast Guard college in Sydney, Cape Breton. I wish I had known about it when I was in high school. It's a gem of an institution. They turn out a great product. It's in a great part of the country. And I would say, stay in school, kids, keep those math and science grades up where they need to be. And the Coast Guard would love to take your application in the years ahead.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. And the students over the last 6 weeks have also learned all about the many benefits that come with working in different positions within the Coast Guard, such as a lot of vacation time off and you know, just learning on the job and working with great people. So all of that definitely makes it very appealing to work towards. So now we will begin taking some questions from our on-screen classes. So if you have questions, just make sure your camera is on so that I know that you're ready to ask some questions. And then anyone who's joining off camera, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them as well. So first, it looks like we have Miss Gibson's class who can ask some questions to you. So I'll bring them on now. Good morning.
Hi. Why did you choose to be a Coast Guard?
Great question. Where is Miss Gibson's class? What part of the country are you in?
Alberta.
Alberta. Well, I chose the Coast Guard. I had been in the Navy for a number of years. The Coast Guard is such a great part of Canada, what we do for Canadians. It was an exciting time to be here. I'm an engineer by way of education, a lot of my experience in life, and it really was an opportunity to make a difference for the Coast Guard and what they do for Canadians. Great question.
Any other questions from Ms. Gibson's class?
We do. We have one more for you here.
Awesome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What's your question?
Do you have a question?
When you're on the ship, how many marine animals do you usually see?
Oh boy, we see them often. But you might go a week or two without seeing a polar bear. But we see seals, we see whales, we see dolphins, we see all kinds of birds. It's an exciting part to see animals like that in the wild, in their own habitat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it okay if we do one more? Or would you like to move on?
Of course. No, of course.
Grayson, you'll be our last one, bud.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, yourself.
Good, thanks for asking. How fast do those ships go when they're on a rescue mission?
Oh, great question. On a rescue mission, the ships go really fast. Now, sometimes that's a function, or it's you have to go a little bit slower, much like in your car. If the road is bumpy, you can't go as fast. So if there are bigger waves, you can't go as fast. But if on a rescue mission and some of our smaller search and rescue lifeboats, they go really quickly. You'd be surprised when you're at sea and you're going maybe 20 miles an hour doesn't sound very fast when you compare it to what you do in your car, or say 40 kilometers an hour. But when you're on in the ocean and it's the waves are moving you around, 40 kilometers an hour is pretty fast. You might need your
Thank
seatbelt
you.
on. You're welcome.
Well, thank you guys for your questions. It looks like we also have a student here from the Navy League Cadets who is very eager to ask some questions. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. I got actually a couple of questions. So the first one is, have you ever like seen one of your ships go to scrap metal? Because some of the Navy ships, like what my division is actually named after in my cadets is Bonaventure, and it got sent to scrap metal. So have you ever had any ships go to scrap metal?
It's a very interesting question. The answer is yes. As one of the questions that Mitchell asked me earlier was, um, do ships get decommissioned? And as our ships do get decommissioned, we often take them to various dealers across the country where they are deconstructed and taken apart and turned into scrap metal. Very good question.
Thank you. And
Jim?
another one. Uh, what time do you guys usually wake up on the ships? Because I know it's kind of different, like on land and on the ships. So what time do you actually wake up on the ships?
Another insightful question. When you wake up on a ship, depends sometimes on what time you need to go on duty on the ship. But we normally wake up early on the ship, and the ship, of course, when we're at sea, runs 24 hours a day. So there are always people getting up at all hours of the day and night in order to make sure the ships stay running. But normally we get up early.
Okay, because that was actually what actually got me very confused, because I'm trying to wake up a little earlier now because I want to be in the Navy, so I want to try waking up earlier now so that I'm actually able to actually be in the Navy and not like wake up around like 8.
Well, I would encourage you to keep getting up early.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like once you perfect the art of waking up a bit earlier, you'll have everything you need. So thank you very much for all your questions throughout the whole program. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you later, okay? All right. And it looks like we have a couple questions from the chat. So the first one here is, what was your most memorable day on the job that you've had so far? Do you have a day that really stands out to you?
Boy, some really insightful questions here, Mitchell, from children across the country. In the Coast Guard, if I were to have a memorable day that would stand out, it would probably be the day back in 2019 when I was fortunate enough to be out in Vancouver for the acceptance ceremony when we took delivery of a new ship. When you take delivery of a new ship that took the better part of 4.5 years to build, a shiny brand new ship with the latest technology on board, and we were there. It was a very proud day for the Coast Guard, and to be part of that ceremony that where you take the ship into service and it's going to serve Canada for 40 or 45 years. Um, it meant a lot, and a lot of people's spent a lot of time both in the Coast Guard and in the shipyard getting that ship ready and built and set to work and taken out on sea to make sure that it was test drive worked out, and to see that all come together in one ceremony was pretty uplifting.
Yeah, well, and if it's anything like a new car, that new boat smell has to be incredible. So
Very, very similar.
awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Deputy Commissioner Smith, and for spending all of the time with us today and answering all of our questions. So thank you to the Coast Guard and all of the classes that are participated in this year's program. Your enthusiasm for this program makes it that much better each year. And on behalf of Canadian Geographic and the Canadian Coast Guard, thank you for an amazing 2025 adoptaship program, and we hope to see you next year. So thank you for joining. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.